The girl was shaking as she stood outside the lottery office barefoot on the hot pavement, clutching a crumpled ticket soaked with sweat and tears. Her clothes were torn, her face thin from hunger, yet her eyes burned with fear. Police sirens pierced the air. A crowd gathered, pointing, shouting. "That ticket isn't hers," someone screamed. Across the street, a ragged man with wild hair was being dragged away in handcuffs. He fought to turn back, his voice breaking as he shouted, "I gave it to her! I gave it to her myself!" Rokhaya froze. If the ticket was taken, she would return to the streets. If the truth came out, everything would change. Before we begin this story, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. And if stories of kindness, justice, and hope move your heart, don't forget to subscribe. Long before the lottery ticket trembled in Rokhaya and Dia's hands, her life had already taught her how fragile hope could be. Every morning she woke beneath the half-broken awning of an abandoned shop near the old bus terminal in Dakar. The metal roof rattled when the wind came from the sea, and when it rained, water leaked through rusted holes, soaking the cardboard she slept on. She learned to fold her body tight, knees to chest, arms wrapped around herself, not just to stay warm, but to feel like she still existed. Rokhaya was 22, but hunger had carved years into her face. Her cheekbones stood sharp beneath her skin, and her eyes, once bright and curious, now carried the quiet alertness of someone who had learned that danger could arrive without warning. She had not always lived like this. There was a time when her name was spoken inside a small family room, when laughter floated through cracked windows, when her mother's voice called her in for dinner. Her father had been a dock worker, his hands rough and strong, his back always aching. Her mother sold vegetables at the roadside. They were poor, but they were together. Then sickness came. First, her father collapsed at work. There was no money for proper treatment, only borrowed pills and whispered prayers. He died on a thin hospital mattress while Rokhaya held his hand, her fingers still too small to fully wrap around his. Her mother tried to stay strong, but grief and exhaustion broke her body slowly. Within a year, Rokhaya was burying her mother too. After the funerals, the house no longer felt like home. Relatives came, counted what little there was, and spoke in low voices about burden and responsibility. Rokhaya tried to be useful. She cooked, cleaned, fetched water. Still, she heard the sighs when she entered a room. Still, she noticed how food portions became smaller when bowls were passed around. Her younger brother Musa was only 10 then. He clung to her whenever strangers visited. Rokhaya promised him again and again that she would never leave him. But promises are fragile when poverty decides otherwise. One afternoon, after a heated argument she pretended not to hear, Rokhaya returned from the market to find Musa gone. A neighbor said an uncle had taken him for school. Another said it was for his own good. No one would tell her where. She searched for days, weeks. She went to addresses scribbled on scraps of paper. She slept outside gates. She begged. Eventually, people stopped answering her questions. Musa disappeared into the city like a drop of water into sand. That was the moment something inside Rokhaya cracked, not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, like a bone breaking under slow pressure. With no parents, no brother, and no place that truly wanted her, she drifted. She slept in unfinished buildings, under stairwells, behind mosques, after evening prayers. Some nights, men's footsteps made her heart race so hard she thought it would burst. Other nights, police officers chased her away with sharp words and harder eyes. Go somewhere else, they always said, as if somewhere else was easy to find. Food was never certain. Some days she survived on leftovers from bins behind restaurants. Other days, Mama Aisatu, the elderly woman who sold rice and fish from a small charcoal stove, slid her a bowl without asking questions. "Eat," Mama Aisatu would say softly. "God sees." Those words kept Rokhaya alive more than the food itself. Still, the city was not kind. People looked through her as if she were air, or worse, looked at her with disgust. Lazy girl. She should find a husband, another street rat. Rokhaya heard it all. She swallowed the words like stones, one after another, until silence felt safer than defending herself. It was during one of those silent days that she first noticed him. He sat near the edge of the market, close to the trash heap, where flies danced in thick black clouds. His clothes were in tatters, his hair tangled and gray with dirt. Sometimes he laughed at nothing, sometimes he shouted at shadows. Children threw pebbles at him when adults weren't looking. "That's the crazy man," someone whispered once when Rokhaya paused nearby. "Stay away." She did stay away at first. But hunger recognizes hunger. Pain recognizes pain. She noticed how the man never begged. He never reached out his hand. He simply sat there staring at the ground, muttering to himself as if the world had already left him behind. One afternoon, after Mama Aissatou gave Rokhaya a small bowl of rice, Rokhaya walked past the man again. She slowed. Her fingers tightened around the warm plastic container. She told herself it wasn't her problem. She barely had enough for herself. Tomorrow was uncertain. Every day was uncertain. Then the man looked up. For just a moment, the madness seemed to lift from his eyes. What she saw beneath it startled her. Not wildness, not danger, but deep, endless exhaustion. The kind that came from carrying memories too heavy for one mind. Without fully deciding to, Rokhaya stopped. She placed the bowl on the ground a short distance from him and stepped back. "You can have it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man stared at the food as if it were a trick. Then he looked at her suspicious, confused. "For me?" he asked hoarsely. Rokhaya nodded. He didn't thank her. He didn't smile. He simply pulled the bowl closer with trembling hands and began to eat slowly, as if afraid it might disappear. Rokhaya walked away before he finished. She didn't want praise. She didn't want attention. She only knew that for the first time in a long while, her chest felt slightly less tight. She didn't know his name then. She didn't know that this single act, small, quiet, unseen, had just tied her fate to his. That night, as Rokhaya curled up beneath her broken awning, the city noises humming around her, she thought of Musa. She thought of her parents. She thought of the strange man by the market. And for the first time in months, she allowed herself a dangerous thought. Maybe kindness still mattered. The next morning, Dakar woke as it always did, horns blaring, vendors shouting, dust rising with every passing footstep. Rokhaya Ndiaye stirred beneath the broken awning, her body stiff from the cold concrete. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. Then the ache in her back and the emptiness in her stomach reminded her. She sat up slowly and rubbed her arms. Around her, the city was already alive, but no one noticed her waking. That she had learned was both a curse and a shield. As she stood, her eyes drifted toward the market road without thinking. Toward him, the crazy man. He was there again, sitting in the same place near the trash heap, as if the ground itself had claimed him. His posture hadn't changed. His clothes hadn't changed. He rocked slightly, murmuring words that made no sense to anyone passing by. Rokhaya hesitated. What she had done yesterday had not been planned. It had been instinct, nothing more. Today was different. Today she was choosing. She had nothing in her hands this time. No bowl, no food. Still her feet carried her closer. As she passed, she heard laughter behind her. "Look at her," a woman scoffed. "Talking to madness now." Rokhaya kept walking. The man suddenly lifted his head. His eyes found her immediately, as if he had been waiting. "You," he said, pointing a trembling finger. "You came back." "I'm just passing," Rokhaya replied carefully. He studied her face with unsettling intensity. "You're not afraid?" Rokhaya shrugged. "I don't see why I should be." He laughed, then a sharp, broken sound that made nearby people glance over with irritation. "Everyone is afraid of what they don't understand." She said nothing. Silence had become her second language. As she walked away, she felt his gaze following her. It lingered on her back long after she disappeared into the crowd. That afternoon, hunger pressed harder than usual. Mama Aissatou's pot was empty when Rokhaya arrived, the charcoal stove already cooling. "Tomorrow," the older woman said apologetically. "Today was bad." Rokhaya nodded. She had expected it. Bad days were more common than good ones. She walked the streets for hours, collecting nothing but rejection. By late afternoon, her head felt light, her steps unsteady. She stopped near a small bakery, hoping for discarded bread. That was when she saw him again. Chaitan Diai stood, or rather wobbled, near the bakery's back door. He was arguing with no one, his hands gesturing wildly, his voice rising and falling. The baker came out furious. "Get away from here," the man shouted, lifting a stick. "I warned you." Chaik flinched, his hands rising to shield his head. The stick came down hard across his shoulder. Before Rokhaya realized what she was doing, she rushed forward. "Stop!" she cried. The baker turned, surprised. "What did you say?" "You don't have to hit him," Rokhaya said, her voice shaking but loud enough to be heard. "He's not hurting anyone." The baker snorted. "Then you take him with you." Rokhaya swallowed. She couldn't do that. She barely had space for herself. Still, she didn't move away. The baker cursed under his breath and stormed back inside, slamming the door. Chek lowered his arms slowly. His breathing was uneven, his eyes wide with something that looked dangerously close to gratitude. "You came," he said. "I didn't want him to hurt you." He stared at her for a long moment, then very quietly he asked, "What is your name?" The question startled her. No one asked for her name anymore. "Rokaya," she replied. "Rokaya," he repeated, tasting the sound. "A beautiful name." She shifted uncomfortably. "And you," he hesitated. Names were powerful things. Names connected you to a past, to a self. Perhaps that was why he had avoided his for so long. "Cheikh," he said finally. "Cheikh Ndiaye." That night, Rokaya found a half-eaten sandwich in a bin behind a cafe. She cleaned it as best she could, broke it in half, and returned to the market. Cheikh was still there. She placed the sandwich beside him and sat down at a distance. "For you," she said. He didn't reach for it immediately. "You will be hungry," he said, frowning. "I'm always hungry." Something in her honesty made him smile. From that day on, a strange routine formed. Rokaya brought what she could, sometimes food, sometimes just her presence. Cheikh spoke when he felt like it. Other times he stared into the distance, lost in a world only he could see. People noticed. "Why do you waste your kindness?" Mama Aisatu asked gently one evening. "The world doesn't reward girls like you." Rokaya shrugged. "I'm not doing it for reward." The city, however, had its own opinions. Children mocked Cheikh more openly when they saw Rokaya near him. Men shouted insults. Women pulled their children away as if madness were contagious. One afternoon, a group of young men surrounded Cheikh, laughing. "Dance for us, crazy man." Cheikh's hands shook. His eyes darted around in panic. Rokaya stepped forward without thinking. "Leave him alone," she said. The tallest man sneered. "Or what?" She stood her ground. "Or you'll have to go through me." They laughed until one of them shoved Cheikh hard enough that he fell. Rokaya screamed. She threw herself between them, arms spread wide, tears streaming down her face. "Enough," she cried. "He's human." For a moment something shifted. Maybe it was her voice. Maybe it was the shame of being seen. They backed away, muttering insults as they left. Cheikh lay on the ground, shaking. Rokaya knelt beside him, ignoring the pain in her knees. "Look at me," she said softly. "You're okay." His eyes met hers, filled with terror and something else. Trust. "No one has ever done that," he whispered. Rokaya helped him sit up. That night Cheikh spoke more than he ever had before. He spoke of loss, though never clearly, of betrayal, of a life that once made sense, now scattered like papers in the wind. Rokaya listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She simply stayed. And somewhere deep inside Cheikh Ndiaye, beneath the layers of trauma and madness, something long asleep began to stir. Hope. By the time a week passed, people in that corner of the market no longer asked why Rokaya Ndiaye sat near the crazy man. They simply shook their heads and called her foolish. But Rokaya kept coming. Not because she thought she was saving Cheikh Ndiaye, not because she believed she had the power to change anyone. She came because the world had taken so much from her, her parents, her brother, her home, yet somehow it had not taken her ability to see another human being. And Cheikh, for reasons even he could not explain, started waiting for her. On the 8th day, the sun was cruel. Heat shimmered above the road like a living thing. Rokaya's feet were dusty, her lips dry. She had managed to get 2 small meat pies from a restaurant worker who pitied her. It was more than she usually had. She stared at the paper bag in her hands for a long moment, doing the familiar math of survival. 2 pies meant she could eat one now and save the other for later. Or she could eat both and pretend she'd be strong enough to survive tomorrow. Her stomach growled, impatient. Then she saw Cheikh across the street, hunched beneath the shade of a torn umbrella someone had abandoned. His eyes were closed, but his hands were moving. Fingers twitching as if he were holding invisible strings. Rokaya sighed and crossed the road. She sat down a few steps away and opened the bag. The smell made her dizzy. She took a bite, forced herself to chew slowly, then broke the second pie in half. She pushed one half toward him. Cheikh's eyes opened instantly. He stared at the food like it was a dream that might vanish if he blinked. "You're giving me your food again," he said, voice raspy. Rokaya shrugged. "I can't eat while you sit there starving." Cheikh's gaze sharpened. "Why?" It wasn't the first time he asked, but it was the first time his voice sounded serious, almost angry, as if her kindness disturbed him. Rokaya looked away. "Because I know what it feels like when nobody cares." Cheikh swallowed. His hands trembled as he picked up the pie half. "People say I'm crazy," he murmured. "They say a lot of things," Rokaya replied. "People talk because it makes them feel safe." Jake chewed slowly, eyes fixed on the ground. Sometimes I hear them. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I don't even hear myself. Rokhaya didn't rush him. She watched the market life swirl around them, shouting sellers, women bargaining, children darting between legs. Life moved fast for everyone else. Here time felt slower. Jake suddenly muttered, "They took everything." Rokhaya's head turned. Jake blinked as if waking from a trance. I don't know." His voice cracked. "I do know, but when I try to hold it, it slips." Rokhaya leaned a little closer. "It's okay. You don't have to tell me." Jake stared at her, confused. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Rokhaya answered honestly. "Because you're not the scariest thing I've met." Jake let out a sound that might have been laughter, but it died quickly in his throat. He looked around, lowering his voice. "Rokhaya, do you believe in destiny?" She hesitated. "I don't know what I believe anymore." Jake nodded slowly, as if that was the only answer that made sense. "I used to believe I could control my life. I used to believe hard work was enough." Rokhaya's chest tightened. Used to Jake's eyes grew distant. "There was a time people called me sir. They shook my hand. They invited me into buildings with shiny floors. They listened when I spoke." Rokhaya stared. The way he said it didn't sound like delusion. It sounded like memory. "You were important," she whispered. Jake flinched. "I was human." A group of women passed nearby, glancing at them with disgust. "That girl is always with him," one hissed. "Maybe she's crazy too." Rokhaya ignored them, but Jake's shoulders hunched as if the words were stones thrown at his back. "You see," he muttered, "they don't want to understand." Rokhaya took a breath and then said something she had never said out loud. "My brother disappeared." Jake's head snapped toward her. "Disappeared." Rokhaya nodded, swallowing hard. "After my parents died, one day he was there, the next day he was gone. They said he was taken to school, but I never saw him again." The confession felt like ripping open an old wound. Her eyes burned. Jake stared at her, expression softening. "What is his name?" Musa Rokhaya whispered. Jake repeated it under his breath, as if turning it into a prayer. Then he lowered his gaze. "I lost people too," he said quietly. "Not like you, but I lost." For a moment their silence sat between them like a shared blanket. Then the day turned sharp, because when Rokhaya stood up to leave, two police officers approached. One was a tall man with a hard jaw and tired eyes, Officer Abdu Diallo. The other followed behind, younger, smirking like he enjoyed his job too much. Officer Diallo looked down at Jake with open irritation. "You again," he said. Jake's body stiffened. His hands twitched. Rokhaya stepped forward instinctively. "Officer, he hasn't done anything." Diallo ignored her. "People complained. They said you're disturbing the market. They said you're scaring customers." Jake shook his head. "I'm not." The younger officer kicked the dirt near Jake's feet, making him flinch. "You hear that?" the younger one mocked. "He's talking to spirits again." Rokhaya's voice rose. "Stop it. Why do you enjoy hurting him?" Diallo turned his gaze on her, then noticing her for the first time like she mattered. His eyes swept over her torn clothes, her thin arms, the desperation she tried to hide. "Girl," he said sternly, "this is not your business. Go." Rokhaya didn't move. "He's not a dog you can chase away." Diallo's face darkened. "Do you want trouble?" Rokhaya's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "If you arrest him, arrest me too." The market seemed to pause. Even Mama Aisatu, watching from her stall, froze with a ladle in her hand. The younger officer laughed. "You want to be his wife, crazy girl?" Jake's eyes widened. He looked at Rokhaya like she had just done something impossible. Diallo exhaled sharply, annoyed, but he didn't want a scene. He leaned closer to Rokhaya and lowered his voice. "You think you're being noble," he said, "but you're feeding a problem. This man is not safe. He could hurt you." Rokhaya's voice softened. "He hasn't hurt me. The world has." Diallo stared at her for a long second. Something flickered behind his eyes. Something like guilt. But it vanished quickly, buried under duty and pride. He gestured at Jake. "Move him from here. If we see him again, we won't be gentle." Then he turned and walked away. The younger officer followed, still laughing. When they were gone, Rokhaya's knees felt weak. She sat back down, slowly breathing hard. Jake's voice came out broken. "Why would you do that?" Rokhaya wiped her face with the back of her hand. Because no one did it for me. Jake stared at her, and in that stare was something heavy, something like realization. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dirty scrap of cloth. He unfolded it carefully. Inside was a tiny piece of paper folded many times, worn at the edges. He held it like it was sacred. Rokhaya frowned. "What is that?" Jake didn't answer immediately. His eyes glistened. Then he whispered, "Destiny is a strange thing." He folded the paper again and tucked it back into the cloth as if he wasn't ready to show her yet. But Rokhaya saw the way his hands shook, and she felt for the first time that something bigger was coming, something that would either save them both or destroy what little peace they had found. From that day on, the market began to whisper. People noticed patterns long before they understood meanings. They noticed that Rokhaya Ndiaye arrived every afternoon, always around the same time, always with something in her hands, even when her hands were nearly empty. They noticed that Jake Ndiaye no longer wandered as far. He stayed close to the broken umbrella, close to the spot where she sat. And most unsettling of all, they noticed that the crazy man was changing. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of change you only saw if you were patient. Jake started bathing at the public tap near the mosque early in the morning before the crowds arrived. His clothes were still torn, but they were cleaner. He combed his hair with his fingers slowly, carefully, as if remembering how. He spoke less to shadows and more to Rokhaya. Some days he barely spoke at all. Other days, words poured out of him in fragments, unfinished sentences, names without faces, memories that broke off just as they began to make sense. Rokhaya never pushed. She had learned that survival was about timing. You didn't force wounds open. You waited for them to speak. One afternoon, the sky turned dark without warning. Rain slammed down hard, scattering vendors and customers alike. Rokhaya and Jake huddled beneath the umbrella, water dripping through holes in the fabric. Jake laughed softly. "This thing doesn't work. It tries," Rokhaya replied. He looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "You never complain." She shrugged. "Complaining doesn't change anything." Jake shook his head slowly. "That's not true. Sometimes complaining is the only thing that keeps a person from disappearing." Rokhaya didn't answer. She was thinking of Musa again. She often did when rain fell. As the days passed, Jake's eyes became clearer. The constant haze lifted just enough for Rokhaya to see what lay beneath intelligent sadness and something dangerously close to shame. One evening, as the market quieted and the call to prayer echoed through the air, Jake surprised her. "Rokhaya," he said carefully. Pronouncing her name, "Do you know what a lottery is?" She laughed softly. "Of course, everyone knows. It's how poor people buy hope." Jake nodded. "Hope can be bought cheaply," he said, "but it's expensive to hold." She studied his face. "Why are you asking?" Jake hesitated. His hand moved toward his pocket, then stopped. "No reason," he said too quickly. That night, Rokhaya dreamed of Musa standing at the edge of a crowd, calling her name while she struggled to reach him. She woke with tears on her cheeks and the taste of fear in her mouth. The next day was worse. Rokhaya arrived at the market to find Jake surrounded by people, not laughing this time, angry. "He stole from me," a woman shouted. Jake stood trembling, confusion written all over his face. "I didn't take anything." "You were near my stall," the woman screamed. "That's enough." Officer Abdou Diallo pushed through the crowd, irritation clear on his face. "What's going on?" he demanded. "He stole the woman," repeated. Rokhaya forced her way forward. "That's not true." Diallo looked at her unimpressed. "How would you know?" "Because I've been with him all morning," Rokhaya said. "He didn't steal anything." Diallo sighed. "Girl, you defend him like your life depends on it." "Because his," she replied. The crowd murmured. Diallo studied Jake closely. For the first time, his gaze lingered not on the dirt, not on the madness, but on the man beneath. "You," Diallo said slowly. "What's your name?" Jake swallowed. "Jake Ndiaye." The name hung in the air, heavier than expected. Diallo frowned. Something about it bothered him, though he couldn't say why. After a tense moment, he waved his hand dismissively. "No proof. Disperse." The woman cursed, but the crowd slowly melted away. Jake sank onto the ground, shaking. "They're always ready to believe the worst," he whispered. Rokhaya sat beside him. "Because it's easier." Jake stared at his hands. "I used to be the one they believed." Her heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Jake closed his eyes. "There was a time when people trusted my words without question, when my signature meant something, when men in suits waited for me to speak. Rokaya's breath caught. Chik, who were you? He opened his eyes, and for a brief moment the madness vanished completely. I was someone, he said, until I trusted the wrong people. He reached into his pocket again and pulled out the folded scrap of cloth. His fingers trembled as he unfolded it. Inside was a lottery ticket, old, creased, nearly unreadable. Rokaya frowned. Why do you have that? Sheikh looked at it as if it were a ghost. I bought it months ago, on a day I thought, maybe this was my last chance. She studied the numbers, meaningless to her. Why didn't you check it? She asked. Sheikh laughed bitterly. Check it where? With what confidence? Who listens to a madman? Rokaya felt a strange chill. You kept it all this time. He nodded. Because even when I lost my mind, I didn't lose everything. He folded the ticket again and held it out to her. Rokaya's eyes widened. What are you doing? Giving it to you. She pulled her hands back. No, that's yours. Sheikh shook his head. I don't need it anymore. That's not true. Sheikh's voice softened. Rokaya, you gave me food when I had nothing. You stood in front of police for me. You reminded me I was human. If that ticket is worth anything, it should change your life. Her throat tightened. I can't take that. You already have, he said gently. Every day. Rokaya stared at the ticket, then at him. Her hands trembled as she finally reached out. I don't even know if it's a winner, she whispered. Sheikh smiled faintly. Neither do I. She folded the ticket carefully and tucked it into her clothes close to her heart. That night, Rokaya couldn't sleep. She kept touching the place where the ticket rested as if it might vanish. She told herself it was nothing, that most tickets lost, that hope was dangerous. But somewhere deep inside her a fragile flame flickered. The next morning, Sheikh didn't appear. Rokaya waited. Noon passed. Afternoon crept in. By sunset, fear clawed at her chest. She searched the streets, the alleys, the hospital entrance, the police post. No Sheikh, only silence. And in that silence, Rokaya realized something terrifying. If the ticket was worth nothing, she would lose only hope. But if it was worth everything, she might lose Sheikh forever. The first night Sheikh and Diaye did not return, Rokaya and Diaye told herself not to panic. People disappeared from the streets all the time. Sometimes they found shelter. Sometimes they were arrested. Sometimes they simply moved on. She repeated these thoughts as she lay awake beneath the broken awning, staring at the dark sky through holes in rusted metal. Still, sleep refused to come. Every sound made her sit up, footsteps distant, shouting a siren wailing far away. Each time her heart leapt, hoping it was him. By morning, fear had replaced hope. Rokaya went straight to the market. Sheikh's place beneath the torn umbrella was empty. The umbrella itself was gone. Her chest tightened. She asked Mama Aisatu first. The old woman frowned. I didn't see him yesterday evening. But child, the police came through again. Rokaya's blood ran cold. The police, Mama Aisatu nodded slowly. They were pushing people around, chasing beggars away. You know how it is. Rokaya didn't wait to hear more. She ran. She ran through alleys, past closed shops, down streets she knew too well. She checked the public tap near the mosque, the back of the bakery, the corner where Sheikh sometimes stood arguing with shadows. Nothing. By midday, the sun burned her skin, but she didn't stop. She forced herself to ask people who usually ignored her. Have you seen the man who sits near the market? She asked again and again. Tall, gray hair, talks to himself. Some shrugged, some laughed. One boy finally said, They took him last night. Who? Rokaya asked breathlessly. The police. They beat him first. The words struck like a blow. Rokaya turned and ran toward the police post without thinking. The building stood squat and ugly at the end of the road, paint-peeling windows barred. She hesitated only a second before stepping inside. Officer Abdu Diallo stood behind the desk filling out paperwork. He looked up sharply when he saw her. You again. Rokaya's voice shook. Where is Sheikh and Diaye? Diallo sighed. I warned you, did you arrest him? She demanded. Diallo leaned back in his chair. He caused a disturbance. People complained. We took him in overnight. Overnight, Rokaya echoed. Where is he now? Diallo's gaze hardened. We released him this morning. Relief surged through her, then vanished. Where, she asked. Diallo shrugged. Not my problem. Rokaya stepped closer. You can't do that. He's sick. He needs help. Diallo stood abruptly. Watch your tone. Rokhaya swallowed, forcing herself to lower her voice. Please, just tell me where he went. Diallo studied her face, the desperation she could no longer hide. He was taken to the hospital last night, he said slowly. He collapsed after questioning. Rokhaya's breath caught. Which hospital? Diallo hesitated. General Hospital, but don't get your hopes up. She didn't wait for permission. The hospital was crowded, noisy, alive with suffering. Rokhaya pushed through bodies, her heart pounding. She stopped nurses, orderlies, anyone who would listen. Cheikh Ndiaye, she repeated. Please, he was brought in last night. Most shook their heads. Finally, a tired-looking nurse glanced up. There was a man like that, she said, brought in by police, weak, confused. Where is he? Rokhaya pleaded. The nurse sighed. He left. Rokhaya's legs nearly gave out. Left. He signed himself out early this morning, the nurse said. Didn't want to stay. Rokhaya closed her eyes, fighting tears. Cheikh didn't like closed spaces. Hospitals reminded him of things he couldn't explain. Did he say where he was going? She asked. The nurse shook her head. He just kept asking for you. Rokhaya's chest tightened painfully. She left the hospital in a daze. For the rest of the day, she searched again. She went farther than she ever had before, into neighborhoods she avoided, under bridges, behind warehouses. As the sky darkened, exhaustion caught up with her. She collapsed onto a low wall, shaking. Cheikh was gone, and in his absence, the weight of the lottery ticket pressed against her chest like a secret she didn't know how to carry. That night, rain fell hard. Rokhaya sat curled beneath her awning, soaked, shivering. She pulled the ticket out and unfolded it with trembling hands. The numbers stared back at her, silent and meaningless. What am I supposed to do? She whispered into the darkness. No answer came. The next morning, something inside her shifted. She could not wait anymore. She walked to the lottery office. The building was clean and bright, everything she was not. She hesitated at the door, suddenly aware of her bare feet, her torn clothes, the look she would receive. She almost turned away. Then she thought of Cheikh's voice. If this works, your life must change. She stepped inside. People stared immediately. Conversations quieted. A security guard frowned. Yes, he asked sharply. I want to check a ticket, Rokhaya said, holding it out. He took it, reluctantly scanned it, then frowned at the screen. His expression changed. Wait, he said slowly. Rokhaya's heart pounded. What? He called someone over. They whispered together, glancing at her again and again. Minutes stretched into eternity. Finally, a woman behind the counter spoke. This ticket, she said carefully, is a winning ticket. The world tilted. Rokhaya grabbed the counter to stay upright. Winning, she whispered. Yes, the woman replied. A major prize. Voices rose around her. People leaned closer. Someone laughed in disbelief. Rokhaya's vision blurred. She thought of hunger, of Musa, of Cheikh sitting beneath the umbrella. I didn't buy it, she said faintly. It was given to me. The woman stiffened. Given to you, yes, by Cheikh Ndiaye. A murmur rippled through the room. The security guard's face hardened. Who? A homeless man, someone scoffed behind her. The woman behind the counter exchanged a look with her colleague. We'll need to investigate, she said. Ownership must be confirmed. Fear rushed back in. Before Rokhaya could respond, a sharp voice cut through the room. That ticket is mine. A well-dressed woman pushed forward, Fatima Johnson. Her eyes locked onto the ticket with hunger. She stole it, Fatima said coldly. I lost that ticket weeks ago. The room exploded with noise. Rokhaya froze, clutching the counter as the world turned against her once again. Outside, unseen, Cheikh Ndiaye stood across the street, leaning heavily against a wall, watching the building with tired eyes. He had followed her, and he knew the storm was only beginning. The lottery office erupted into chaos. Voices collided like waves, shock, accusation, curiosity. Fatima Johnson stood tall in her crisp dress, chin-lifted, eyes sharp with certainty. She looked nothing like Rokhaya Ndiaye, who still clung to the counter barefoot and trembling, her fingers white with tension. That ticket is mine, Fatima repeated louder this time. I lost it weeks ago. Ask anyone. A security guard stepped closer to Rokhaya, his body language already suspicious. Madam, he said stiffly, we'll need you to step aside. Rokhaya swallowed. I didn't steal anything. Fatima laughed, a short, cruel sound. Of course you'd say that. The woman behind the counter raised her hands. Everyone, please. This will be handled properly. Rokhaya felt the room closing in. She searched faces for kindness and found none. People leaned forward hungry for drama. Some whispered that this was exactly what they expected from a girl off the streets. I was given the ticket, Rokhaya said again, her voice shaking but clear, by Sheikh Ndiaye. The name fell like a stone into water. Sheikh who, someone scoffed. The crazy man, another voice mocked. Fatima's smile widened. You see, she's lying. A homeless madman didn't give her anything. She picked it up somewhere and thought she could fool us. Rokhaya's chest burned. He's not crazy. That earned laughter. The manager of the office finally stepped forward, his tone measured. Miss, if the ticket was given to you, we'll need proof, witnesses, documentation. Rokhaya's shoulders sagged. Proof. She had none. Her voice broke. I only know what he told me. Fatima crossed her arms. And I know what's mine. The manager nodded. Then we'll pause payment until ownership is confirmed. Rokhaya felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Where will the ticket be kept? Fatima asked. In our secure vault, the manager replied. Rokhaya reached out instinctively as the ticket was taken from her hand. The paper left her fingers, and with it, the fragile hope she had barely allowed herself to feel. Outside, the sun beat down mercilessly. Rokhaya stumbled out of the building, her legs weak. She didn't know where to go or what to do next. The crowd dispersed quickly, losing interest now that the drama had paused. She leaned against the wall, pressing her palms to her face. I told you this would happen. The voice startled her. Rokhaya looked up, heart pounding. Sheikh Ndiaye stood a few steps away. He looked worse than before. His face was pale, his movements slow, one hand pressed against his side as if holding himself together by sheer will. But his eyes were clear. Sheikh, she whispered. He nodded. You shouldn't have gone alone. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. They took the ticket. They think I stole it. Sheikh exhaled slowly. Fatima Johnson. Rokhaya froze. You know her? Sheikh's jaw tightened. I know exactly who she is. He leaned heavily against the wall, wincing. Rokhaya rushed to his side, instinct taking over. You're hurt, she said. I'll live, he replied quietly. But this is my fault. Rokhaya shook her head. No, I chose to check the ticket. Sheikh closed his eyes briefly. I should have told you everything sooner. They sat on the curb together, the city flowing around them like a river that didn't care if you drowned. Who are you really? Rokhaya asked softly. Sheikh stared ahead, his voice low. Once I was a financial consultant. I advised companies. I signed papers that moved money across borders. Rokhaya listened, stunned. I trusted the wrong people, he continued. Babacar Fall was one of them. He and others used my name to secure deals, then erased me when things went wrong. When I tried to fight back, they called me unstable. They made sure I lost everything, my job, my home, my credibility. Rokhaya's heart ached. And Fatima. She worked with them, Sheikh said. She knew about the ticket. She knew I bought it. She laughed when I told her it was my last hope. Rokhaya clenched her fists. Then she's lying. Yes, Sheikh said. And now she thinks she can take everything again. Rokhaya looked at him, fear mixing with determination. What do we do? Sheikh hesitated. We prove the truth. How? Rokhaya asked. No one listens to people like us. Sheikh met her gaze. They will, because this time I won't disappear. The next day, Fatima Johnson arrived at the lottery office with confidence. She wore sunglasses and carried herself like victory was inevitable. I'm here to check on the investigation, she said smoothly. Behind the scenes, however, something had begun to shift. The manager had reviewed security footage from weeks earlier, grainy but revealing. A man resembling Sheikh stood at the counter purchasing a ticket. Fatima appeared beside him, impatient, dismissive. The manager frowned. Meanwhile, Sheikh went somewhere he hadn't dared to go in years. A small church near the edge of the district. Pastor Emmanuel Kuyate listened silently as Sheikh spoke, his hands clasped tightly. You believe me? Sheikh asked when he finished. The pastor nodded. I've seen what betrayal does to a man, and I've seen what kindness does too. He promised to speak. Mama Aisatu promised the same. I saw him buy that ticket, she said firmly. I remember because he gave me change and smiled. Slowly, pieces came together. Rokhaya watched Sheikh move through the city with a strange mix of fear and pride. He walked carefully, still fragile, but there was purpose in his steps now. On the third day, the lottery office called Rokhaya back. Her heart hammered as she entered the building again. Fatima was already there, arms crossed, irritation flickering beneath her calm exterior. The manager cleared his throat. "We've reviewed additional evidence," Fatima scoffed. "Evidence from who?" Beggar's cheek stepped forward. "I bought the ticket," he said clearly, "on the 15th, at 9:10 in the morning." Fatima's smile faltered for the first time. "You're insane," she snapped. The manager raised a hand. "Security footage confirms a man matching his description purchasing a ticket that day." Fatima's face flushed. "That proves nothing." Mama Aisatu stepped in next, her back straight, her voice unwavering. "I remember him. I sold him rice that morning." Pastor Koyate followed. "He came to my church that same day and prayed." The room grew quiet. Rokaya's breath caught. Fatima's confidence crumbled into fury. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "You're all conspiring." The manager's tone hardened. "Until further notice, the ticket remains under Sheikh Ndiaye's ownership." Rokaya's knees nearly buckled. Fatima spun toward Sheikh, her eyes blazing. "This isn't over." Sheikh held her gaze steadily. "It is for me." Outside, Rokaya laughed and cried at the same time. "It worked," she whispered. Sheikh smiled faintly. "Not yet." He looked at the building, then at her. "The hardest part is still coming." Rokaya followed his gaze, understanding dawning slowly. Winning the lottery was only the beginning. Keeping the truth alive would cost them more than they imagined. Victory did not feel the way Rokaya and Ndiaye imagined it would. There were no cheers, no sudden warmth spreading through her chest. Instead, there was tension tight and buzzing, like the air before a storm. As she and Sheikh Ndiaye stepped out of the lottery office, the city seemed unchanged. Buses still honked, vendors still argued over prices, people still hurried past without looking twice. Yet everything had shifted. Sheikh walked slowly, his steps careful, his body still recovering from nights spent hungry and beaten. Rokaya matched his pace, afraid that if she moved too quickly, this fragile moment would shatter. "They believed you," she said quietly, as if saying it too loudly might undo it. Sheikh nodded, but his expression remained guarded. For now, they didn't go back to the market. Sheikh insisted on taking a longer route, winding through quieter streets where memories didn't ambush him at every corner. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the road. "Where are we going?" Rokaya asked. "There's somewhere I need to go?" Sheikh replied. "One last place." They stopped in front of a small crumbling building with faded blue paint. A sign hung crookedly above the door, barely readable. Sheikh stared at it for a long moment, his jaw clenched. "This was my office," he said. Rokaya looked at him in shock. "Here, yes," he replied softly. Before everything fell apart. The windows were boarded up now. Dust coated the door. The place looked forgotten, just like the man who once worked inside it. Sheikh took a step forward, then stopped. His breathing quickened. Rokaya placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to go in." He swallowed hard. "I do. If I don't face it now, I never will." They pushed the door open together. Inside, the air was stale. Broken furniture lay scattered, papers yellowed with age clinging to the floor. Sheikh moved slowly through the space, touching the walls as if greeting old ghosts. "I used to stay late," he murmured. "I thought if I worked harder, I could protect myself." Rokaya listened, her heart heavy. "People took advantage of you." "Yes," Sheikh said, "because I trusted them. Because I believed kindness alone was enough." He turned to her then. "You should be careful, Rokaya. The world punishes people like us." She met his gaze steadily. Then, let it try. That night, they slept near the mosque courtyard. Sheikh insisted Rokaya take the safer spot near the wall. For the first time in weeks, he slept deeply. Rokaya did not. Her mind raced with questions. What would happen next? Would Fatima fight back? Would the lottery officials truly release the money? And what did this mean for her, someone who had lived day to day for so long that the future felt unreal? At dawn, shouting woke her. A crowd had gathered near the lottery office again. Rokaya's heart dropped. She ran, fear driving her legs faster than exhaustion ever could. Fatima Johnson stood at the center of it all, arguing loudly with the staff. Her composure had cracked completely. "This is theft," she shouted. "You're giving money to a madman and a street girl." Rokaya pushed through the crowd, cheek close behind. The manager raised his voice. "Madam, the investigation is ongoing. Please lower your voice." "I will not," Fatima snapped. "I demand." The police officer Abdu Diallo appeared moments later, his expression grim. "What's happening?" he asked. Fatima turned to him eagerly. "Officer, arrest them. They're trying to steal my money." Diallo's gaze flicked to Sheikh, then to Rokhaya. Something unreadable passed across his face. Sheikh spoke first. "Officer, you know me." Diallo stiffened. "I know who you were." Sheikh nodded. "Then you know I'm not lying." Silence fell. Diallo cleared his throat. "The lottery office has evidence supporting his claim. Until further notice, there will be no arrest." Fatima stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." Diallo's jaw tightened. "I am," the crowd murmured. Some faces showed disappointment, others reluctant respect. Fatima leaned close to Rokhaya, her voice low and venomous. "This won't save you. People like you don't keep money for long." Rokhaya met her eyes. "People like me survive." Fatima stormed away, heels striking the pavement like gunshots. The manager turned to Sheikh and Rokhaya. "We'll need a few more days to finalize everything. There are procedures." Sheikh nodded. "We understand." As they walked away, Sheikh suddenly staggered. Rokhaya caught him just in time. "You're not okay," she said urgently. He winced. "I haven't eaten properly in days." This time Rokhaya didn't hesitate. She took him straight back to the hospital. Nurse Kadi Sar recognized him immediately. "You came back," she said softly. "Yes," Sheikh replied. "I think I'm ready to stay." The words sounded like surrender and courage at the same time. Sheikh was admitted for observation. Rokhaya sat beside his bed watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly. "I'll be fine." She shook her head. "I stayed when you were starving. I'll stay now." For the first time, Sheikh smiled without sadness shadowing his face. Hours passed, then days. Rokhaya slept on a chair, ate whatever scraps she could find, and refused to leave. Other patients noticed her. Some whispered. Others offered small kindnesses, an extra cup of tea, a piece of bread. On the third day, a visitor arrived. Babakar Fall. He entered the room in a tailored suit, confidence dripping from every movement. His eyes landed on Sheikh, and something like annoyance flickered across his face. So Babakar said smoothly, "You're still alive." Sheikh's expression hardened. Disappointed, Babakar glanced at Rokhaya dismissively. "I see you found new company." Rokhaya stood. "Why are you here?" Babakar smiled thinly. "To offer a deal." Sheikh laughed bitterly. "You already took everything from me." "Not everything," Babakar replied. "You still have the power to walk away quietly." Rokhaya felt her stomach twist. "What do you mean?" Babakar leaned closer. "Withdraw your claim. Let the ticket go. I'll make sure you're taken care of." Sheikh stared at him in disbelief. "You think I'd do that?" Babakar shrugged. "Think of her," he said, nodding at Rokhaya. "Do you really want her dragged through courtrooms and headlines?" Sheikh's jaw clenched. Rokhaya stepped forward. "We're not afraid of the truth." Babakar's smile vanished. "You should be." He turned and walked out without another word. The door closed softly behind him, but the threat lingered. Sheikh exhaled shakily. "He's desperate." Rokhaya nodded. "That means we're winning." Sheikh reached for her hand. "Whatever happens, thank you." She squeezed his fingers. "We're not done yet." Outside the hospital, the city waited, unaware that two lives were standing at the edge of something vast and dangerous. And somewhere deep within Rokhaya, a quiet certainty settled. The storm was not over, but neither was she. The days that followed felt heavier than the years Rokhaya Ndiaye had spent on the streets. Sheikh Ndiaye remained in the hospital, his body slowly recovering while his mind wrestled with memories he had buried deep. The doctors said rest was essential, but rest did not come easily. Every time Sheikh closed his eyes, faces returned, men in suits, contracts, sliding across polished tables, smiles that hid knives. Rokhaya noticed. She noticed how his hands clenched in his sleep, how his breathing changed when footsteps echoed in the hallway, how his eyes darted to the door whenever someone new entered the room. "You're safe here," she whispered one night, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Sheikh opened his eyes. Safety is temporary. Rokhaya swallowed. So is fear. Outside the hospital walls, the story was spreading. A homeless man, a street girl, a winning lottery ticket, accusations, betrayal. People talked. Some spoke with admiration, calling it a miracle. Others with suspicion, convinced it was a scam waiting to be exposed. The lottery office delayed announcements, citing procedures, verification, and legal reviews. Meanwhile, Fatima Johnson did not stay silent. She hired a lawyer. Rokhaya learned this when a formal letter arrived at the hospital addressed to Sheikh Ndiaye. The envelope looked harmless. The words inside were not. "They're challenging ownership," Sheikh said quietly after reading it. "They want to drag this through court." Rokhaya's chest tightened. Court means money, lawyers, time. Sheikh nodded. "All the things we don't have." She stared at the letter, anger bubbling beneath fear. "She's trying to exhaust us." "Yes," Sheikh said. "That's how people like her win." That evening, Pastor Emmanuel Kouyaté visited again. He sat by Sheikh's bed, his presence calm and grounding. "You're not alone," the pastor said gently. "There are people willing to testify, people who remember." Sheikh looked at him, eyes tired. "Is that enough?" The pastor smiled softly. "Truth rarely stands alone. It needs voices." Rokhaya felt something stir in her chest, hope cautious but real. The next morning, Nurse Katie Sarr pulled Rokhaya aside. "You should eat," she said firmly, pressing a small wrapped meal into her hands. "You won't help anyone by collapsing." Rokhaya smiled weakly. "Thank you." As she ate, she watched Sheikh from across the room. He was sitting upright now, reading an old newspaper someone had left behind. For the first time, he looked like himself. Not a ghost haunting the city, but a man reclaiming space. Later that day, Officer Abdou Diallo arrived. Rokhaya stiffened immediately. Sheikh noticed and placed a reassuring hand over hers. Diallo stood awkwardly near the door. "I'm not here to arrest anyone." Sheikh studied him calmly. "Then why are you here?" Diallo hesitated. "I was asked to give a statement about the night we detained you." Rokhaya's heart pounded. "What did you say?" Diallo looked uncomfortable. "The truth. That you were mistreated, that you needed medical care." Sheikh's eyes widened slightly. "Why?" Diallo sighed. "Because I was wrong." The words hung heavy in the room. "I've seen men like Babacar fall before," Diallo continued. "Powerful, untouchable, and I've seen what happens to people they crush." He glanced at Rokhaya. "I didn't want to be part of that anymore." Rokhaya felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you," Sheikh said quietly. Diallo nodded once and left. As the legal tension grew, so did the emotional weight. Rokhaya found herself snapping at small things, raised voices in the hallway, the beep of hospital machines. She dreamed of Musa again, but now he stood behind glass reaching for her while she banged helplessly on the other side. One evening, overwhelmed, she slipped outside the hospital and sat on the steps, burying her face in her hands. "What if we lose?" she whispered into the night. Sheikh joined her moments later, a blanket draped over his shoulders. "Then we lose," he said simply. "But we don't lie, and we don't run." Rokhaya looked up at him. "You're not afraid?" Sheikh smiled sadly. "I already lost everything once. Fear doesn't have much power over me anymore." She nodded slowly. "I wish I had your strength." Sheikh shook his head. "You gave me mine." A week passed, then another. Finally, the lottery office announced a hearing. Rokhaya's hands trembled as they entered the building again. This time there were no whispers, only open stares. Cameras flashed. Reporters crowded the entrance. Fatima Johnson arrived, flanked by her lawyer, confidence carefully reconstructed. Babacar Fall stood a few steps behind, her expression unreadable. Sheikh walked in beside Rokhaya, his posture straight, his gaze steady. Inside the room buzzed with anticipation. The manager began outlining the investigation. Footage was shown. Witnesses spoke. Mama Aisatu's voice cracked as she described the day Sheikh bought the ticket. Pastor Kouyaté spoke calmly, firmly. Officer Diallo recounted the arrest, the hospital visit. Fatima's lawyer objected repeatedly, his tone sharp. Character witnesses mean nothing if the claimant is mentally unstable. The word hit like a slap. Sheikh rose slowly to his feet. "I may have been broken," he said clearly, his voice steady. "But I was never dishonest." The room fell silent. "I bought that ticket," he continued, "not because I believed in miracles, but because I had nothing left. And when I met Rokhaya, I realized something." He turned to her, eyes shining. "Kindness saved my life long before this ticket ever could." Fatima's face tightened. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering urgently. She shook her head. "This is emotional manipulation," she snapped. "You're all being fooled." The manager raised a hand. "Enough." He looked down at the documents before him. "Based on the evidence presented," he said slowly, "the ticket belongs to Sheikh Ndiaye." A gasp rippled through the room. And as per lottery policy, he continued, he has the legal right to transfer ownership. All eyes turned to Cheikh. He took a deep breath. I transfer it to Rokhaya Ndiaye, he said without hesitation. Rokhaya froze. Cheikh, he squeezed her hand. This was always meant for you. The manager nodded. Then it is done. Fatima stood abruptly, fury blazing in her eyes. You'll regret this. Babakar Fall remained silent, but his jaw tightened. Outside reporters shouted questions. Rokhaya couldn't hear them. Her ears rang, her heart pounding wildly. They had won. But as they stepped into the sunlight, Cheikh's grip on her hand tightened. This isn't the end, he murmured. People like Babakar don't walk away quietly. Rokhaya looked ahead, her face set with determination. Then we won't either. Winning the hearing did not bring peace. It brought attention. Within hours, Rokhaya Ndiaye's face was everywhere, on phone screens, on whispered conversations, on the lips of people who had once stepped over her without seeing her. Reporters camped outside the hospital gates. Strangers pointed when she walked past. Some smiled with admiration. Others looked at her with the same suspicion she had known all her life. Cheikh Ndiaye noticed the shift immediately. This is dangerous, he said quietly as they watched a group of journalists argue with security at the hospital entrance. When people smell money, they stop seeing human beings. Rokhaya folded her arms tightly across her chest. I never asked for this. Cheikh met her gaze, but it came anyway. The lottery officials transferred the first portion of the winnings into a temporary holding account while legal procedures continued. It wasn't the full amount yet, just enough to confirm that the victory was real. Real enough to awaken old enemies. 2 days after the hearing, Babakar Fall made his next move. Rokhaya learned about it from a nurse who whispered urgently as she passed. There are men downstairs asking for you, the nurse said. They're not police. Rokhaya's stomach dropped. Cheikh was sitting upright in bed reading when she told him. His expression hardened instantly. Did they give names? He asked. No. Rokhaya replied. But they said they represent business interests. Cheikh closed the book slowly. Babakar. He swung his legs over the side of the bed despite the nurse's protests. You shouldn't be walking. Rokhaya said, grabbing his arm. I should be protecting you, he replied. They met the men in the hospital lobby. 2 of them wore expensive suits. The third stood slightly behind, eyes scanning the room like a predator assessing exits. One of the men smiled politely. Mr. Ndiaye, Miss Ndiaye, we'd like to have a word. Cheikh's voice was calm. Speak here. The man chuckled softly. Perhaps somewhere more private, no, Rokhaya said firmly. Here. The man's smile tightened. Very well. He leaned in slightly. Our client is willing to resolve this situation amicably. A generous settlement in exchange for your silence. Cheikh laughed short, bitter. You already tried that. This time the man continued smoothly. The offer is much larger. Rokhaya felt her hands tremble. What if we say no? The man's eyes flicked to her, assessing. Then things may become uncomfortable. Cheikh stepped forward, placing himself between Rokhaya and the men. You're threatening us in a hospital. The man raised his hands innocently. Just stating possibilities. Before Cheikh could respond, a familiar voice cut in. That's enough. Officer Abdou Diallo approached from the side, his uniform unmistakable. Is there a problem here? He asked. The men stiffened. One of them forced a smile. No problem, officer. Just a conversation. Diallo's gaze was cold. Conversations like this tend to end badly. I suggest you leave. The men exchanged looks. Without another word, they turned and walked out. Rokhaya's legs felt weak. Thank you, she whispered. Diallo nodded. Be careful. Babakar won't stop. Cheikh exhaled slowly. I know. That night, Cheikh was discharged from the hospital. He insisted they leave immediately. Staying visible makes us targets, he said. Rokhaya didn't argue. They moved into a small, modest guest house on the edge of the city, nothing luxurious but clean, quiet, and safe. Rokhaya slept on a real bed for the first time in years. She cried into the pillow until her chest hurt. The next morning, Cheikh sat across from her, hands folded. There's something we need to decide, he said. Rokhaya wiped her eyes. About the money? Yes, Cheikh replied. And about us? She frowned. What do you mean? Cheikh hesitated. You can walk away from this. Take the money when it's released. Start a new life. Somewhere far from me, from Babakar, from all of this. Rokhaya stared at him, stunned. Why would I do that? Because I'm the reason this danger exists, he said quietly. Because my past keeps dragging you into storms you didn't choose. Rokhaya stood abruptly. Stop. She took a shaky breath. I didn't choose the streets either. I didn't choose hunger. I didn't choose to lose my family, but I survived. She met his eyes fiercely. I'm not leaving you behind now. Sheikh swallowed. Rokhaya. We face this together, she said firmly, or not at all. For a long moment, Sheikh said nothing, then he nodded. Together, days passed, lawyers finalized documents, the remaining winnings were scheduled for release. Then the attack came, not physical, but calculated. A headline appeared online. Lottery scam exposed homeless man manipulated by street girl. Rokhaya read it with shaking hands. The article painted her as a con artist, Sheikh as mentally unstable. It claimed witnesses were bribed. It questioned the legitimacy of the transfer. At the bottom was a familiar name, Babacar Fall. Rokhaya felt sick. They're destroying us. Sheikh clenched his jaw. They're trying. Within hours, social media exploded. Comments were cruel. She doesn't deserve it. Give it to someone respectable. This is why poor people shouldn't have money. Rokhaya shut her phone off, hands trembling. Sheikh watched her quietly. Do you regret it? He asked. She shook her head. I regret that kindness makes people angry. The next day, Pastor Emmanuel Kouyaté called. We need to respond, he said. Not with anger, with truth. He arranged a small press conference at the church. Rokhaya was terrified. I can't speak in front of cameras, she whispered. Sheikh held her hand. You don't have to perform, just tell the truth. The church filled with reporters, curious locals, skeptical faces. Rokhaya stepped forward, her voice trembling at first. I didn't plan any of this, she said. I fed a man because he was hungry, that's all. Murmurs rippled through the room. I slept on the streets. I lost my parents. I lost my brother. If someone thinks I'd risk everything to steal, then they never knew how much I've already lost. She paused, tears in her eyes. This money doesn't make me better than anyone. It just gives me a chance to live. Sheikh spoke next. He named Babacar Fall openly. He described the betrayal, the manipulation, the lies. The room grew quiet. That night, something shifted. Public opinion softened. Support poured in from unexpected places. Church groups, market vendors, strangers who had seen too much injustice to stay silent. Babacar Fall, sensing the tide turning, withdrew from public view. But Sheikh knew better. He's not finished, he said. Rokhaya looked out the window at the dark city beyond. Neither am I. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running from fear. She was standing inside it. The city seemed to hold its breath after the press conference. For a brief moment, the noise softened, the headlines slowed, the rumors thinned. Rokhaya Ndiaye dared to believe that truth once spoken could settle like dust after a storm. She was wrong. 2 nights later, the guest house manager knocked on their door with trembling hands. There are men outside, he whispered. They're asking questions. They're not guests. Sheikh Ndiaye stood immediately, his body still weak but his instincts sharp. He peered through the narrow window. A dark car idled at the curb. 2 silhouettes leaned against it, faces hidden by shadow. Pack only what you need. Sheikh said quietly, we leave now. Rokhaya's heart raced. Where will we go? Somewhere they won't expect. Sheikh replied. They slipped out through the back, moving fast, breath held tight in their chests. The streets were quieter at that hour, but danger felt closer in the silence. They walked until their legs burned, then flagged down a passing taxi. North Sheikh told the driver, don't stop. They didn't speak again until the city lights faded behind them. They reached a small coastal town just before dawn. Salt air fishing boats, a place where Sheikh had once helped a community cooperative years ago before everything collapsed. The people there remembered him not as a madman, but as a man who had kept his word. An old fisherman named Amadou opened his door without hesitation. You look like trouble followed you, Amadou said, studying Sheikh's face. Sheikh nodded. It did. Then you'll stay. Amadou replied simply. The days that followed were tense but quieter. Rokhaya helped mend nets, cleaned fish, learned the rhythm of tides. At night she sat beside Sheikh as he stared out at the water, his thoughts far away. Babacar won't let this go, Sheikh said one evening, not after being named publicly. Rokhaya nodded. What will he do next? Sheikh hesitated. He'll try to turn the law against us. The answer came sooner than expected. A letter arrived by courier official, heavy with authority. Babakar Fall had filed a civil suit accusing Cheikh of fraud, coercion, and mental incompetence at the time of purchase. Rokaya's hands shook as she read. He's trying to say you weren't in your right mind. Cheikh's jaw tightened. That's the final move. If he proves I was incompetent, the ticket transfer becomes void. Rokaya felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Can he do that? He can try. Cheikh replied, and courts listen to men like him. They returned to the city under legal advice. The courtroom loomed large and unforgiving, marble floors echoing with footsteps that sounded like judgment. Babakar Fall sat confidently at the front, flanked by lawyers. He didn't look at Cheikh or Rokaya. He didn't need to. Power rarely bothered with eye contact. The hearing began with clinical precision. Babakar's lawyer spoke smoothly. Mr. Ndiaye was homeless, disoriented, exhibiting signs of mental instability. He was not competent to make financial decisions. Rokaya's chest burned with anger. Cheikh stood when it was his turn. His voice was steady, but the weight of the room pressed down on him. I was homeless, he said. I was traumatized, but I knew who I was. I knew what I owned. Babakar's lawyer smiled thinly. Then why didn't you claim the ticket yourself? Cheikh paused. Because I didn't trust the world, not after what it did to me. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Rokaya was called to testify. She stepped forward, palms damp, knees weak. Why did Mr. Ndiaye give you the ticket? The lawyer asked sharply. Rokaya took a breath. Because he believed kindness deserved a future. The lawyer scoffed. Or because you influenced him. Rokaya's eyes flashed. I never asked him for anything. I gave him food. That's all. Food can be a form of manipulation, the lawyer pressed. The judge raised a hand. Enough. Then something unexpected happened. The court clerk announced additional witnesses. Nurse Katie Sarr testified first, describing Cheikh's clarity during admission. Officer Abdou Diallo followed, recounting how Cheikh answered questions coherently even under stress. Mama Isadu spoke again, voice unwavering. Finally, a psychiatrist took the stand. I evaluated Mr. Ndiaye after his hospitalization, she said calmly. He was suffering from acute stress and trauma, but he was not incompetent. He understood consequences. He understood ownership. Babakar's composure cracked. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Fall, do you have further evidence? Babakar stood abruptly. This is a witch hunt, he snapped. You're all being manipulated by sentiment. The judge's voice hardened. Sit down. The room fell silent. After a tense recess, the ruling came. The court finds no evidence that Mr. Ndiaye was mentally incompetent at the time of purchase or transfer, the judge said. The claim is dismissed. Rokaya's breath left her in a sob. Babakar stared, stunned, then furious. Outside, reporters surged forward again, but this time their questions sounded different. How does it feel to be vindicated? What will you do next? Cheikh shielded Rokaya with his arm. We will live, he said simply. That night, as they returned to the guest house, exhaustion settled over them like a blanket. It's over, Rokaya whispered. Cheikh shook his head gently. The legal fight is over. The healing is just beginning. Rokaya leaned her head against his shoulder. I don't know who I am without fear. Cheikh smiled softly. Then we'll discover that together. Outside, the city hummed on, unaware that two people once invisible had just reclaimed their names. The city did not celebrate quietly. By morning, the ruling was everywhere, on radio talk shows, on handwritten posters, taped to kiosks, in conversations shouted across crowded streets. People argued, debated, judged. Some called it justice. Others called it luck. A few called it dangerous. Rokaya Ndiaye woke to the sound of her name spoken by strangers. She lay still for a moment, listening to the guest house come alive, the scrape of chairs, the clink of cups, the hum of a radio announcer repeating her story as if it belonged to everyone now. Cheikh Ndiaye sat by the window watching the street below. They're turning us into symbols, he said quietly. Rokaya sat up, pulling the thin blanket around her shoulders. Is that bad? Cheikh considered the question. Symbols are useful and disposable. Rokaya felt a chill. What does that mean for us? It means we must decide who we are before others decide for us. That afternoon, the lottery officials called again. The final transfer was ready. The full amount would be released within 48 hours. Rokaya stared at the phone after the call ended, her hands trembling. It's real, she whispered. Cheikh nodded. Yes, silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. I don't want a big house. Rokhaya said suddenly. Or cars, or people bowing when I walk past. Chek smiled faintly. I didn't think you would. I want to find Musa. She continued, voice tight. I want to know if he's alive, if he's hungry, if he thinks I abandoned him. Chek reached for her hand. We'll find him. Rokhaya hesitated. And you? Chek looked away. I want to make things right, not just for me. The first step came sooner than expected. Pastor Emmanuel Kuyate arrived with news. Babakar Fall has been questioned by financial investigators, he said. The court ruling opened doors. Old deals are being examined. Chek's jaw tightened. He won't forgive me. The pastor met his gaze. Forgiveness isn't always the goal. Accountability is. That evening, Chek made a decision that surprised even Rokhaya. I'm turning myself in, he said. Her eyes widened. For what? For everything I didn't fight hard enough, he replied. For every deal I signed without looking closely. For every silence that allowed others to be crushed. Rokhaya stood panic rising. They could twist that. They already tried. Chek said gently. This time, I speak first. The next morning, Chek walked into the financial crimes office with a file of documents he had kept hidden for years. Copies, notes, names. He spoke for hours. Rokhaya waited outside, her heart pounding with every passing minute. When Chek finally emerged, his face was pale but resolute. It's done, he said. Whatever comes next, I won't run. Within days, arrests followed. Accounts were frozen. Names once spoken with reverence were now whispered with fear. Babakar Fall vanished from public view. The city's mood shifted again, this time toward reckoning. Meanwhile, Rokhaya began her own search. She hired social workers, placed notices, visited old neighborhoods where she and Musa once slept. She followed rumors and half-truths, each lead pulling her deeper into memories she had tried to bury. Every night she returned exhausted, hope bruised but alive. One afternoon, a call came from a shelter on the outskirts of the city. There's a young man here, the worker said carefully. He says his sister's name is Rokhaya. Rokhaya couldn't breathe. They drove in silence, the road stretching endlessly ahead. At the shelter gate, a thin young man stood hesitantly, eyes scanning the car. Musa, Rokhaya whispered as she stepped out. He looked up. For a second, he didn't move. Then recognition flooded his face. Rokhaya, he asked, voice breaking. She ran. They collided in a tangle of arms and tears, holding each other, like the world might tear them apart again if they let go. I thought you left me. Musa sobbed. I searched. Rokhaya cried. I never stopped. Later, as they sat together, Musa told his story, how he had been moved from house to house, worked instead of studied, escaped, survived. Chek watched quietly from a distance, eyes shining. That night, Rokhaya slept for the first time without dreams of glass walls. Weeks passed. The money arrived. Rokhaya opened a modest account and locked the rest away. She refused interviews. She declined invitations. Instead, she visited the market, the hospital, the church. She paid Mama Aisatu's debts and rebuilt her stall. She funded a small kitchen near the bus terminal. No signs, no speeches, just food served daily. She paid for Musa's schooling and counseling. Chek, meanwhile, testified in ongoing investigations. He helped authorities trace funds and expose networks. The process was slow and painful, but each step lifted a weight from his chest. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset over the city, Rokhaya spoke softly. I used to think money would erase fear. Chek smiled. And now I think it only reveals who we choose to be. Chek nodded. Then you've chosen well. In the distance, the city hummed, still flawed, still loud, still unfair, but somewhere within it, a quiet circle of change had begun, and it was growing. With Musa finally safe, the world felt different to Rokhaya and Daye. Not easier, not suddenly gentle, but grounded. Every morning she woke to the sound of her brother moving around the small apartment they had rented, an ordinary sound that still felt miraculous. He complained about the taste of tea. He asked too many questions about school. He laughed at jokes that weren't funny. Each sound stitched something back together inside her. Chek Ndiaye watched this transformation quietly. You've changed, he said one evening as they shared a simple meal. Rokhaya smiled softly. So have you. He nodded. I don't wake up feeling hunted anymore. That peace, however, came with responsibility. The investigations Chek had helped ignite were spreading. Bank accounts were frozen. Former partners of Babakar Fall began distancing themselves publicly, issuing statements that rang hollow. One afternoon, a call came from an unfamiliar number. "This is the Financial Crimes Unit," the voice said. "Mr. Ndiaye, we need you to come in." Rokaya's heart skipped. "Is he in trouble?" No, Cheikh replied calmly. "This is part of the process." Still, the fear lingered. At the office, Cheikh sat across from investigators who now treated him with respect. They asked detailed questions, not accusations. They showed him documents he recognized, contracts he once signed in good faith. "You were used," one investigator admitted, "but you also helped us understand how." Cheikh exhaled slowly. "Then make it count." Outside, the city reacted in its own way. Some hailed Cheikh as brave. Others called him foolish for turning against powerful people. Anonymous threats still arrived, occasionally less frequent, but sharp enough to remind them that not everyone believed in justice. Rokaya read one such message late one night and felt the old fear tighten in her chest. Cheikh noticed immediately. "They're losing power," he said gently. "That's when they shout the loudest." Rokaya nodded, though sleep did not come easily that night. Meanwhile, Musa struggled to adjust. Years of instability had taught him not to trust comfort. He jumped at sudden noises. He hoarded food beneath his mattress. He watched strangers with wary eyes. Rokaya sat with him often, reminding him he was safe. "You don't have to hide anymore," she said one evening. Musa looked at her seriously. "You say that now. But what if this disappears?" Rokaya swallowed. "Then we survive again, together." Slowly, Musa began to believe her. At school, teachers noticed his intelligence and his anger, both raw, both untrained. Rokaya arranged counseling, something she herself had never received. Cheikh watched from a distance, admiration clear in his eyes. "You're building something solid," he said. Rokaya looked at him thoughtfully. "So are you." Because Cheikh had started visiting the market again, not as a ghost, not as a man begging for space. He walked openly now, greeting vendors, listening. People hesitated at first, unsure how to approach him. Then, gradually, they remembered the man he used to be or discovered him anew. One afternoon, Mama Isa too pulled him aside. "You know," she said, smiling, "people listen when you talk." Cheikh chuckled softly. "They didn't before." "They do now," she replied. "Use it." That night, Cheikh sat with Rokaya on the balcony. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what comes next." Rokaya leaned against the railing. "Me too. I don't want to disappear into comfort." Cheikh continued, "Not after seeing how easily people are erased." Rokaya nodded. "I was thinking the same." They talked long into the night, voices low, dreams careful but determined. A plan began to form. Weeks later, a small sign appeared near the bus terminal community support center. "Open daily, no speeches, no press releases." Inside, there were chairs, counseling sessions, job placement boards, and hot meals. Cheikh helped design financial literacy workshops. Rokaya coordinated food and outreach. Musa volunteered after school. People came hesitantly at first. Men and women like Rokaya once was carrying invisible wounds. Some cried, some laughed nervously, some didn't speak at all. Cheikh listened. "You don't owe us gratitude," he told them. "Just pass it on when you can." The work was exhausting but honest. Then one afternoon, a familiar name resurfaced. Babakar Fall had been located. He was being held pending further charges: financial fraud, coercion, obstruction of justice. The news hit Cheikh harder than he expected. Rokaya noticed him pacing that evening, hands clenched. "You don't have to go see him," she said gently. Cheikh stopped. "I think I do." The meeting room was cold and bare. Babakar looked smaller than Cheikh remembered, older, stripped of confidence. When he saw Cheikh enter, something like disbelief flickered across his face. "You ruined me," Babakar spat. Cheikh sat across from him calmly. "You ruined yourself." Babakar laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than me now, playing savior?" Cheikh met his gaze. "No, I think I survived you." Babakar's smile faded. "You were weak." Cheikh nodded. "I was." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Babakar spoke again, quieter. "Why didn't you disappear like you were supposed to?" Cheikh stood. "Because someone fed me when I was starving." He left without another word. Outside, Cheikh inhaled deeply, as if breathing for the first time. Rokaya waited nearby. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. As months passed, the noise faded. The headlines moved on. New scandals replaced old ones. But the center remained. Musa thrived at school. He smiled more easily. He slept through the night. One evening, as the three of them sat together, Musa spoke suddenly. Do you think people can really change? He asked. Rokhaya glanced at Cheikh, then back at her brother. Yes, she said softly, but not alone. Cheikh nodded, and not without truth. The city outside buzzed as always, imperfect, restless, alive. But in that small space, they had carved out something rare had taken root. Not wealth, not fame, but dignity. Time did not heal everything, but it softened the sharpest edges. By the time the rainy season arrived, the community support center had become part of the neighborhood's rhythm. People no longer whispered when they approached the door. They came openly, now mothers with tired eyes, men carrying the weight of lost jobs, young people unsure where to place their anger. Rokhaya and Diaye learned everyone's names. She learned which stories needed silence and which needed to be spoken aloud. She learned that some people only wanted a meal, while others wanted someone to look them in the eye and say, "I see you." Cheikh and Diaye watched her work with quiet awe. "You were born for this," he said one evening as they stacked empty bowls. Rokhaya smiled faintly. "I was shaped by it. Musa helped too. At first he swept floors and carried water. Later he began helping younger children with homework. He was still healing, still learning how to trust the future, but his laughter returned more often now. Yet not everything was calm. One afternoon, a woman collapsed outside the center, malnourished, shaking, heavily pregnant. Panic rippled through the room. Cheikh knelt beside her immediately. "We need a hospital." Rokhaya grabbed her bag without hesitation. "I'll go with her." At the hospital, old fears resurfaced. Bright lights, urgent voices, the smell of antiseptic. Nurse Katie Saar recognized Rokhaya instantly. "You again," she said gently. "Bring her in." Hours passed. The woman survived. The baby cried a strong, angry sound that filled the room with life. Rokhaya felt tears slide down her cheeks. Later, as she sat outside the maternity ward, Cheikh joined her. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I remembered what it felt like to be invisible here." Cheikh sat beside her. "You're not invisible anymore." Rokhaya looked at him. "That's what scares me." He understood. Being seen meant being judged, watched, expected to be strong all the time. That night, as rain hammered the tin roofs across the city, Rokhaya lay awake, staring at the ceiling. "What if I fail them?" she whispered. Cheikh turned toward her. "Who, everyone?" she replied. "Musa, the people at the center, the girl I used to be." Cheikh was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Failure isn't falling. It's forgetting why you stood up." She closed her eyes, breathing steadily. The next challenge came from within. A local official visited the center unannounced, flanked by assistants. "You're doing good work," he said, smiling, "but you should formalize, register, partner with the city." Rokhaya listened carefully, and then he continued smoothly. There would be oversight, guidelines, funding channels. Cheikh sensed the tension immediately. What kind of oversight? The official's smile thinned, the kind that ensures accountability. After he left, Rokhaya sat in silence. "They want control," she said. Cheikh nodded. "And visibility." Rokhaya's chest tightened. That's how this started to go wrong before. Cheikh reached for her hand. "We can set boundaries." They did. They registered the center legally but refused political branding. They accepted donations with transparency and rejected those with conditions. It wasn't easy. Some funding disappeared, some doors closed, but the work remained honest. One evening, Musa came home unusually quiet. "What's wrong?" Rokhaya asked. He hesitated. "Kids at school asked if I'm rich now." Rokhaya knelt in front of him. "And what did you say I said?" "I'm safe," Musa replied. Her throat tightened. That was the right answer. Weeks later, an invitation arrived, formal, embossed, heavy with meaning. Cheikh stared at it for a long time. "It's from the Economic Accountability Forum," he said. "They want me to speak." Rokhaya's eyebrows lifted. About what happens when systems forget people?" Cheikh replied quietly. Fear flickered across Rokhaya's face. "That's a big stage." Cheikh nodded. "Which is why I'm afraid." She took his hands. "You don't owe them perfection, just truth." The forum hall was packed. Cheikh stood at the podium, the lights bright, the room hushed. "I was once respected," he began. "Then I was erased, not because I was guilty, but because I was convenient." He spoke of betrayal, of silence, of what happens when power goes unchallenged. "And I was saved," he concluded, "not by money, but by kindness from someone who had nothing." Applause rose, not thunderous, but sincere. Afterward, a young woman approached Rokhaya. I used to sleep at the bus terminal, she said softly. I saw you there once. Rokhaya swallowed. Are you okay now? The woman nodded. I am. That night as they walked home, Rokhaya felt something shift again. Not fear, not hope, but acceptance. They could not fix everything, but they could remain present. The final test came quietly. A letter arrived confirming Babakar Fall's sentencing. Prison time, asset forfeiture, a full accounting of crimes. Cheikh read it slowly, then folded it. How do you feel? Rokhaya asked. Cheikh exhaled. Empty and free. Rokhaya leaned her head against his shoulder. Is that enough? It is, he said, because justice isn't joy, it's balance. As the year ended, the center held a small gathering. No speeches, no cameras, just food, music, and stories. Musa laughed with friends. Mama Aisatu danced awkwardly, everyone cheering. Nurse Kadi stopped by after her shift. Rokhaya watched it all, heart full and steady. Cheikh stood beside her. We're not heroes, she said softly. He smiled. No, we're witnesses. The rain began again, soft this time, gentle. And under its steady rhythm, Rokhaya realized something profound. She no longer lived in survival mode. She lived in purpose. The morning Rokhaya Ndiaye woke without fear, she didn't recognize it at first. There was no sudden miracle, no voice announcing the change. It came quietly, like light slipping through a curtain she had kept drawn for years. She lay still, listening to the ordinary sounds of life, Musa brushing his teeth in the next room. A radio playing softly somewhere outside, a kettle beginning to boil. Ordinary. For someone who had survived chaos, ordinary felt almost sacred. She rose, washed her face, and caught her reflection in the mirror. The girl who stared back at her still carried scars. Faint ones beneath the eyes, deeper ones in the heart, but there was steadiness there now, a sense of place. Downstairs, Cheikh Ndiaye sat at the small table reading notes for a workshop he was leading later that day. He looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that didn't ask for reassurance anymore. Sleep, he asked. Yes, Rokhaya replied. Then she added, surprised by her own honesty. Peaceful. He nodded. Good. They walked to the community support center together as they often did. The neighborhood greeted them without ceremony. No cameras, no whispers, just nods, small waves, familiar faces. Inside, the center hummed with quiet purpose. A woman stirred a pot in the kitchen. Two men argued gently over job listings pinned to the board. Musa sat at a table with three younger boys, helping them practice reading. He caught Rokhaya's eye and grinned. Her chest tightened with gratitude. Cheikh began his session on budgeting and debt, his voice calm and clear. He spoke plainly without pride or performance. People listened because he didn't talk down to them. He talked with them. Rokhaya moved through the space, checking on everyone, answering questions, offering a steady presence. She had learned that leadership wasn't about control. It was about consistency. At midday, a reporter appeared at the door. Rokhaya felt a familiar tension rise, but it faded just as quickly. We're not doing interviews today, she said gently. The reporter hesitated. Just a comment. People still want to hear from you. Rokhaya smiled politely. Then tell them this, we're busy. The reporter nodded, almost relieved, and left. Cheikh caught her eye from across the room and raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. We said what we needed to say. That afternoon, Rokhaya received a message she had been waiting for and dreading. A former relative had finally responded to her inquiries about Musa's past. The message was brief, apologetic, empty. Rokhaya stared at the screen, emotions rising, anger, sadness, relief, all tangled together. Cheikh sat beside her. You don't owe them forgiveness, he said softly. I know, she replied. But I owe myself closure. That evening she told Musa the truth, what she had learned and what she hadn't. Musa listened quietly, his expression serious beyond his years. So, we don't need them, he said finally. Rokhaya smiled through tears. No, we have each other. As months passed, the center expanded not in size but in reach. Other neighborhoods began replicating the model, not copying Rokhaya's name, copying her principles. Cheikh was invited to advise quietly. He always asked the same questions first. Who is this for? Who decides who gets left out? When answers felt honest, he stayed. When they didn't, he walked away. One evening after a long day, Rokhaya and Cheikh sat on the rooftop of their building, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Do you ever miss it? Rokhaya asked, the idea of disappearing. starting somewhere no one knows us. Jake thought for a moment. Sometimes, but I don't miss who I was when I was invisible. Rokhaya nodded. Neither do I. She hesitated, then asked the question she had carried quietly for months. Jake, what are we? He turned to her, surprised not by the question, but by the tenderness in it. We are people who found each other, he said carefully, when we needed it most. She smiled. I like that answer. The year turned. On the anniversary of the day she first shared food with him at the market, Rokhaya returned there alone. The trash heap was gone now, the space cleaned, repurposed. She stood where the torn umbrella once leaned. She closed her eyes. She remembered hunger, shame, fear, and the moment she chose kindness anyway. When she returned to the center, a small celebration waited, not planned by her, but for her. Mama Aisatu hugged her tightly. Nurse Kadi raised a cup of tea. Musa laughed too loudly. Cheek watched, eyes warm content. Rokhaya felt something settle fully in her chest. Not pride, not triumph, belonging. Later that night, after the lights dimmed and the voices faded, Rokhaya stood by the window looking out over the city that had once swallowed her whole. She whispered to the darkness, "Thank you." Not to fate, not to luck, to the choice she made when she had nothing. And somewhere within her, the girl who once slept beneath a broken awning finally rested. This story is not really about a lottery ticket, it is about a choice. Rokhaya did not change her life the day she won money. Her life changed the day she chose kindness, when she had nothing to gain and everything to lose. She fed a man the world had already thrown away, not because she believed in miracles, but because she refused to let hardship turn her heart cold. And Jake's journey reminds us of another truth. Losing everything does not mean you have lost your worth. Sometimes when the world strips you of status, comfort, and respect, it leaves you face to face with who you truly are. What saves us in those moments is not power or wealth, but human connection. This story teaches us that kindness is never wasted. It may not return immediately. It may come back disguised as pain, delay, or even injustice. But when kindness is real, it builds something far greater than money, dignity, purpose, and hope. Money gave Rokhaya options, but kindness gave her direction. And perhaps the most powerful lesson is this: you don't have to be rich to change someone's life. Sometimes all it takes is a meal, a moment, or the courage to see a human being where others see a problem. Now we want to hear from you. What part of this story touched you the most? Do you believe kindness always finds its way back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories of humanity, justice, and hope speak to your heart, please subscribe to this channel and stay with us, because the next story might be the one you need most.